The topic of today's discussion is trade balance and current account. Given the national debate that's going on trade and related issues, I think this is one of the most pressing issue in the modern era. So we'll try to understand what's actually going on and how economists view the issue of trade balance and international borrowing. To motivate the ideas, let's go back to an article I'm going to show you that appeared in Harvard Business Review. So this is the article that appeared in Harvard Business Review on July 27, 2018. And the title of the article is Why the US Trade Deficit Can Be a Sign of a Healthy Economy. So what's the story? Let's try to understand the story here. So the story is we lose $800 billion a year on trade every year. President Trump said in March when he announced his new tariff plan, referring to the size of the US trade deficit in goods. Trump has lamented the US trade deficit repeatedly, tweeting that as a result of it, our jobs and wealth are being given to other countries. The trade skirmishes that have broken out as a result have the potential of becoming a full scale trade war of the sort that the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 started, which is widely credited with either triggering or deepening the Great Depression of the 1930s. But the question is, what is the trade deficit and what causes it, and is it a bad thing? And I think in this particular lecture, we'll try to focus on this issue. What is trade deficit and is it necessarily a bad thing? And this week, we'll talk about more about what's going on. And to understand what's going on, we need to first get through certain concepts. So first, let's talk about what is balance of trade or trade balance. It is nothing but the gap between a nation's exports and imports. We know we have a trade surplus if export is more than import, and we have a trade deficit if exports are less than import. Also, we have a related concept which is called merchandise trade balance. This is the balance of trade looking only at goods, often the most cited measure of trade by popular media. Now, obviously in modern world, goods is not the only thing we trade. We do trade a lot of services, especially in a country like the United States, which is a high income country. Goods comprise less than half of country's total production, while services comprise more than half. So you can imagine in modern trade, goods are becoming less and less important and services are becoming more and more important. So when we talk about trade, just talking about goods is not the full picture. To get a fuller picture, we need to look at trade in services as well to understand what's actually going on. Now, to understand what's actually going on, let me show you something called a current account, and it is a better measure of trade. What current account balance is a broad measure of the balance of trade that includes trade in goods and services as well as international flows of income and foreign aid. So this is a typical current account balance for the United States in 2015, and you can see here we have on the leftmost column goods, services, income receipts from payments, unilateral transfers, and current account balance. We have value of exports, that means money that's flowing into the United States, and value of import, that is money that is flowing out of the United States. Now, why it is so? When we sell something to the rest of the world, somebody is paying us. That is, money is flowing into the country. At the same time, when we import goods or services, we are sending out the money. In this particular example, we can see goods in 2015 were $410 billion of goods we exported. At the same time, we imported $595.5 billion of goods. So we had a trade deficit in goods of $185.3 billion. Now here's the interesting part. We also exported $180.4 billion of services, and we imported $122.3 billion worth of services as well. But we ran a trade surplus in services of $50.8.1 billion. In addition, we also have income receipts and payments. These are the monies that we are paying to the rest of the world or the monies we are receiving from the rest of the world for our investments and all sorts of things. So in 2015, we received $203 billion, but we sent out or paid somebody $152.4 billion and then ran a surplus of $50.6 billion. So in terms of actual cash flows, we ran a surplus. And then there are unilateral transfers. These are foreign aid and all sorts of things. So what are unilateral transfers? These are payments that government, private charities or individuals make in which they send money abroad without receiving any direct goods or services. For example, money that US gives as foreign aid through something called US aid, and also to the international organizations like World Bank, UNDP, and all sorts of organizations. So when you add up all these things, this is the total resources that flowed into the country, which was $820.7 billion. The resources that flowed out of the country was $934.4 billion. And our trade deficit or our current account deficit was $113.7 billion. This is your current account deficit. And this is the money that flowed out of this country on a net basis in the year 2015. Now, one interesting thing you can see here, our current account deficit is much lower than our trade deficit in goods. So this gives you a much fuller picture. So we are running right now a current account deficit, which means that more money is flowing out of this country than coming in. So let's try to look at the historical data, what's actually going on. So this gives the trade balances in historical international context. So the graph here shows the current account and merchandise trade balance in nominal dollars. So these dotted lines are current account, balance, and this blue lines are merchandise trade balance. And again, what is merchandise trade balance? This is the balance in terms of goods only and no services. What you see here, pretty much the blue line and the red line moved together historically. However, since 2010, there is a persistent gap between the blue line and the red line. On the top of it, we are running a current account deficit starting from somewhere mid 1975, and since 1975 we almost every year we ran a current account deficit. That means more money is flowing out of this country than that's coming in. However, if you look since 2010, there's a persistent gap between current account deficit, which is much lower than the merchandise trade balance, and the gap is because of the fact that we are running a trade surplus in services. So this gap is potentially trade surplus in services. So to get a bit better picture or to get a more consistent picture, it's important that you need to look into current account rather than just the trade balance, because trade balance can give you a very perverted view of what's actually going on. Rather, we should focus on the current account, and of course in current account right now we are running a current account deficit. So US runs a current account deficit. Now the important question is how US pays for running current account deficit, from where the money is coming. If you're running a deficit, that means somewhere that additional money has to come. The question is where it is coming. To understand that aspect, we need to understand financial capital. What does it mean? So, financial capital is nothing but the international flows of money that facilitates trade and investment, and they are accounted in something called the capital account. And what is a capital account? It shows the net change in physical or financial asset ownership for a nation. Now, related to this concept is something called balance of payments, which is also known as BOP, which is a summation of current account plus capital account, and it should always be equal to zero, which essentially means that if you're running a current account deficit, which is a negative thing, that means we need to run a capital account surplus, which is a positive, because the negative and positive will add up to zero. So balance of payment has to balance, which means that it has to be zero, the summation of current account and capital account. And what capital account include? It includes the flow of physical or financial assets, which essentially means that more money is coming into US through capital account. At the same time, if we are spending more money that's going out in the current account. Now the question is, what kind of money is included in capital account? To understand it better, we need to understand flow of investment of goods and capital. What this is showing is the flow of goods. So this is my home country and this is the rest of the world. That is, so if I sell something to the rest of the world, that shows up as exports. Obviously this is not free, right? When we sell something, we should be getting payments for those exports. So this shows a corresponding flow of income. Similarly, when we buy something, we are importing, we pay for those imports, the financial flow. So there's every flow of goods and services, there's the corresponding financial flow. Similarly, when I invest abroad, foreign investment goes from the US to the rest of the world. There is a reverse flow of investment income receipt. Also, there are investments from the rest of the world that foreigners invest in our country. But this is not free, right? We need to pay them back those investment income. So this portion you can say is your capital account, and this portion, upper portion, is your current account, and both needs to balance. So capital account plus current account, which is also called balance of payment, has to add up to zero. So here are some important points. First, a current account deficit means that country is a net borrower from abroad, which is also called current capital account surplus. That means if you are running a current account deficit, that means we are spending or sending out more money than we are receiving, which means that somebody has to pay for it. And how do we pay for it? We pay for it through capital account surplus, which means that more foreign money is flowing into the United States to pay for those expenses. Conversely, a positive current account balance means a country is a net lender to the rest of the world, which is called capital account deficit. So if a country runs a current account surplus, which means that they are investing abroad, they are running a capital account deficit. Here's the important point. An inflow and outflow of foreign capital does not necessarily refer to a debt that government owe to other governments. All the government debt may be part of the picture. So anytime you are buying a property outside the country, say you buy a house in France, in that case it's a capital money is flowing out of this country, that will show as something going out in capital account. On the other hand, when foreigners come here and try to buy a hotel, for example, Chinese investors bought some big properties in US, which is a capital account inflow. That means money is coming into this country. So here's the final thing. So international flows of financial capital refers to all the ways in which private investors in one country may invest in another country. That includes buying real estate, buying companies, financial investments like stocks and bonds. So bottom line is this: if we are running a current account deficit, which means that money is flowing out, now to compensate for this, money has to come in. And that comes through capital account when foreigners come here and invest in US by buying US assets, which includes buildings, which includes government debt, which includes lots of other ways that money do come in. So in US, we are getting a lot of foreign money gets invested in this country because we are running a current account deficit. And in the next lecture, we'll get into more details how our trade balances, which is trade deficit in our case, is fueling this flow.